Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the 81st Forest Industry Lecture. I hope you've all enjoyed the poster session, which is always a big part of our spring Phil's experience. Before we begin, I always do this. My name is Barb Thomas. I always forget to introduce myself. I'm Associate Professor in the Department of Renewable Resources and have had the pleasure of being the academic lead along with Brad Pino and Marty Luckert for the Phil's event. So I'll start again. I'd first like to say that the University of Alberta acknowledges that we are located on Treaty 6 territory and respects the histories, languages, and cultures of First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and all First Peoples of Canada, whose presence continues to enrich our vibrant community. Next, I'd like to turn your attention to the brochure that you've all hopefully have picked up, and which provides our event for today, and also gives a little bit of a history of our Phil's, and Peter Murphy had put that together some time ago for us, and it's really nice to have that bit of history with us every time that we meet twice a year to have a look at that. Next, I would like to actually acknowledge our sponsors, who are the folks that make this all possible for us and have allowed this event to go on for so many years. It's just an outstanding example of what coming together as a community can produce. So in alphabetical order, Alberta Agriculture and Forestry, the Association of Alberta Forest Management Professionals, Alberta Forest Products Association, Alberta Innovates, Alberta Pacific Forest Industries, Inc., Altus Group Limited, ANC Timber, Canadian Forest Products, Canadian Institute of Forestry, Rocky Mountain Section, Carson Integrated, Ltd., Connie Dermott, Environmental and Forestry Services, Earth Econ, Envirostat Solutions, a new member to the group, Four Core Solutions, Forest Soil Science, FP Innovations, FRI Research, Genome Alberta, Greenlink Forestry Inc., Incremental Forest Technologies, Miller Western Forest Products, MNP LLP, Natural Resources Canada, Division of the Canadian Forest Service Northern Forestry Centre, Norboard Inc., Philip Robert Enterprises, PwC Canada, Silvicon Limited, Tolko Industries, Vanderwell Contractors, West Fraser Mills, Weyerhaeuser Company, Wild and Pine, and Woodland Operations Learning Foundation. So please join me in thanking all of our sponsors for their continued support. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce our Dean of AILS, Dr. Stan Blade, who will give a bit of a greeting as well as introduce our next person, who will then introduce our speaker. Thank you, Stan.
Perfect. Thank you.
Holding my drink.
Thanks very much, Dr. Thomas. Welcome all. It's great to have you here for the 81st lecture within the Forest Industry Lecture Series. It's a great pleasure. I would also certainly like to extend my thanks to all of the people that are helping to make this happen through our partnership and sponsorship activities. As you may know, we're doing this a little differently this year, so I'm very grateful to the committee, first of all, for testing some new ideas, and certainly look forward if people have any insights or thoughts about the kinds of things that we're testing out here today, just to get your opinion. I should also add on a thanks to our speaker, Dr. Vic Lieffers. We're very grateful for having one of our own to give the lecture this afternoon. I think I said before that we owe him probably a small crock of whiskey or something like that at this stage, but very grateful as well. Dr. Thomas has also already referred to the pamphlet, but I would also welcome you to read the history that Dr. Peter Murphy has put together. And for the perceptive amongst you, and I know that that's the entire crowd at a Phil's activity, you would realize that the first forestry class started in 1970. So we already are starting to think about a 50th anniversary coming up in 2020, not that far away, and starting to think about all the ideas. We've had a number of centennials and other anniversaries over the last 3 or 4 years, but the 50th anniversary of the start of the teaching program in forestry here at the University of Alberta will be an important one. And I would just like to acknowledge Cynthia Strawson is helping us out to think a little bit about all of this. If you want to wave a hand. So if you have some brilliant ideas already about how we can actually celebrate forestry, the 50th anniversary in 2020, please feel free to talk to Cynthia or any of our colleagues here. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Ellen McDonald, who is the Department Chair for Renewable Resources. Please give a round of applause for Ellen.
Thanks, Dan. Well, it's my very great pleasure to have the responsibility this afternoon to introduce our guest speaker, and I'm extremely pleased to do so. I was reflecting as I walked over here, and I realized that I began working with Vic 31 years and 6 days ago when I was 10 years old and he was 12. As a postdoc, and he's been a wonderful colleague and mentor to me for all those years, and so I'm very pleased to have him as our speaker, very grateful that he took on this responsibility, and I'm very pleased to introduce him to you. So he joined the Department of Forest Science in 1983 and has been a professor of forest ecology and silviculture since that time. He's preceded me as chair of the department, and he also preceded me as chief editor of the Canadian Journal of Forest Research. From 2000 to 2012, he was an NSERC Industrial Research Chair, sponsored by West Fraser and Weyerhaeuser in silviculture and enhanced forest management. And in that chair position, he established the Centre for Enhanced Forest Management and produced over 60 industrial research extension notes, training many forestry professionals in this area, many of whom I know are in the room today. Just a few of his significant research contributions. Vic has done work that contributed to our understanding of regrowth of aspen after disturbance, establishing white spruce seedlings following harvesting, regeneration of forests after natural disturbances like fire and mountain pine beetle, carbohydrate dynamics and factors affecting tree mortality, and crown collisions and effects on leaf area development in conifer stands. He has supervised more than 70 graduate students and postdoctoral fellows and has published over 200 peer-reviewed papers. He's currently also chair of the Rocky Mountain section of Canadian Institute of Forestry. So clearly Vic is extremely accomplished. He exemplifies a professor in terms of research, teaching, mentorship of graduate students, extension to the community. His achievements have been recognized by a number of important awards. He's received a Canadian Institute of Forestry Scientific Achievement Award and the Tree of Life Award. He's been named a Killam Annual Professor, and he received the Scientific Achievement Award from the International Union of Forest Research Organizations. He also received awards for teaching, Faculty of Agriculture, Life and Environmental Sciences Teacher of the Year many, many times, and Ed and Peggy Turknowick's Award for Innovation in Teaching Forestry Field School. All of these accolades he's highly deserving of. So I'm extremely pleased to have him as our speaker, and please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you, Ellen. That was very kind of you. I'm really pleased to be here. I'm honored to be the speaker today. Also a bit intimidated, to be honest, with all the talented and knowledgeable and experienced people in the room. Because I'm going to talk about some things that probably are going a little beyond my normal skill sets. But it's a presentation that I would have given 6 months from now, but I put the afterburners on and sort of prepared the schedule for it early. I'm currently working on with a group of younger professors in our department, the Charles Knock, and and Jen Beverly and Brad Pino to look at our reforestation policies and what they mean for our future forest. And I've been looking at this for a number of years in the past. 15 years probably is spent on this topic on and off, a little bit here and a little bit there, looking at it and trying to understand what it actually means. The last month or two, I've had enough time to actually spend some time to actually get my head completely in the game. It's surprising how professors could spend their life without having that opportunity to really spend the time looking at things. And I looked at the Forest Policy Acts and all the regulations across Canada in terms of regeneration standards. I looked at the Alberta forest planning manuals, trying to understand them, how they all fit together, what they mean. And I'm going to try to thread together a talk today, and that's what you're going to see, this talk in terms of this reforestation. And I thought I'd put things in perspective in terms of the history and where we are now and what we should be doing in the future. So, forest regeneration is really important. It's one of the biggest things that we do as forest managers. It's got all kinds of implications for biodiversity. And there's people in the room that are way better skilled at that, and I'm going to let them deal with that. Not that it's not important for biodiversity. What I'm going to talk about is forest yield. And it's a topic that I know is dear to my heart, but it's dear to a lot of people's heart in the room, and especially in the forest industry and the government. They want to know about yield. And it's one of the reasons that forests have been regenerated is to make sure that we are going to get future forest yield. And let's be honest, I like trees, I like wood, I'm a woodworker. What other product can you have that you can enjoy while it's growing and sit on a hillside, watch it and enjoy the benefits of the water, the streams, the biodiversity while it's growing? And you can cut down some of the trees and regenerate a bunch of them back. And then you can take the wood, put it in a barn or a house, use it for 50 years, and knock the barn over or house, take some of the boards and plane them up and sell them as tables to rich folks. And then you can, after the table is finished its life, you burn it in a power plant and generate green electricity. Pretty sweet, isn't it? That's the potential for wood products, and we should be always looking at that. So that's why I'm really excited about it. Today's talk is going to stay at the 50,000-foot level. And I'm not going to get into the weeds on many of the topics because I want to talk about too many things along the way. So forgive me if I gloss over a bunch of important things that you think are important. They probably are, but we can't be here all week. Okay? So let's get on with it. The forest management puzzle is the way I describe it. We've got a complex system of forest management, and we've got a whole group of very competent people who are working on this big problem of forest management. And there's a whole bunch of them in this room, and they're all specialized. They're specialized to work in economics, or growth and yield, or timber supply, or forest management, or bugs, or pathology. They're working on all kinds of things. They're very competent people. You know that, because you are. But you don't generally get very far out of your puzzle piece. And you don't have the opportunity to look at the whole big picture very often. And so that's what I'm going to try to do today. I don't want to offend anybody. I'm not going to try to present myself as being smarter than you or anything like that in any way. And don't take offense by anything I say, because it's probably, I'm pushing myself into places I maybe shouldn't go, but I'm going to do it anyway for this talk. Okay, so that's the forest management puzzle. What I'm going to do in the presentation, I'm going to talk about the development of Alberta silviculture, our current state and where we're going to and what next. And this is the theme I want you to take away today. So I'm going to say this theme a number of times, and so write it down because this is what I'd like you to leave the room with. Resistance, resilience to disturbance should be our primary goal in silviculture. If we don't do this, we're going to be in trouble. Okay? And I'm going to state questions along the way, acknowledging that I don't know what the heck what all the right answers are, because there's probably, this is a community effort to figure out what the right answers are. And so I'm going to state a bunch of these questions along the way for you to consider to the talk. And I'll maybe give you a suggestion of what I think might be a direction, but certainly not going to be an exhaustive list of answers for everything along the way. Okay, what's silviculture? That's what the talk's about. It's the art of producing, tending a forest, controlling forest establishment, and composition, structure, and growth. That's what Smith said in 1797. And it's a good definition, and it is all-inclusive. It's a big definition because you could actually do silviculture and have forests produced for other purposes other than wood production, for all kinds of other things, including biodiversity or watersheds or other things like that. But we do tend to focus on wood production, and that's the reality of it. It requires that you be pretty good at a whole bunch of things, ways trees grows and stand and develop, techniques and machines, economics and policy, and you have to know what the owner wants. What does the owner want out of the actions that you're doing? Okay, Alberta has adopted a pretty narrow approach, a pretty conservative approach to silviculture, where it's pretty simple in terms of regenerate a stand, cut a stand, regenerate it, tend it, grow it, and cut it down again in the future. Okay, so that's the simple definition of silviculture. It doesn't have to be that simple, but we've adopted that, and let's have a look at that. Okay, silviculture is going to be at the bottom of this diagram. It fits in with and disperses itself all the way up into that whole forest management puzzle. It's very important for all kinds of reasons, but yield is what I'm going to focus on, or try to. Let's look at the past. I'm going to spend about 5 to 10 minutes on this, not very long. In the 1950s, we established some of our first forest management agreement areas, and prior to that, it was all cut and leaf for natural, diameter limit cutting only the biggest trees out. Regeneration sometimes happened, sometimes not. Not as good as it could be. There was early concerns about regeneration, and then by about the 1970s, the term "not sufficiently restocked" came into being as an important component of our psyche in Canada. And there was all kinds of inquiries as what to do about it. Developed the BC Canada Forest Resource Development Agreement. That's one of the big programs that was developed, federal program. Made a huge difference in terms of the way plantation forestry is done in Canada. It led to was followed then by more strict regeneration standards. The regeneration standards started earlier than the 80s, but they became quite strict and prescriptive. Better planting stock, site preparation, competition control became part of the game. And finally, in the more recent years, in the last decade, we've got this linkage to yield as a primary driver of forest regeneration. How fast is the plantation regrowing? because that's going to link to an annual allowable cut. Okay? Okay, one of the first big successes was Des Crosley and drag scarification. Really simple technique. In retrospect, it's simple, but somebody had to be smart enough to figure this out, that they were going to take advantage of the serotinous cones and regenerate pine stands by scuffing up the ground, putting the cones in the right place, the sun heats them up, releases the seed, away goes. It grows a forest. Wonderfully successful, probably 1 million hectares of forest have been regenerated this way, very successfully across Alberta and Canada. Very good research-driven work by CFS and Crosley. Okay, 5 years later, that's the way it looks. Works like a hot damn. So be proud of that because it's been very successful. Okay, early planting, not so good. The stock types were lousy, and probably a lot of it was dead before it went in the ground. It was green and dead, and a lot of the material didn't grow in the 70s, and so this was one of the things that caused this business of why we needed the Forest Resource Development Agreement. And I actually spent a lot of time and money fixing this problem, having material that actually grew. And so there's all kinds of techniques and new strategies for establishing forest, horticultural techniques, getting the right recipes for planting seedlings, growing them, storing them, giving them the right moisture and fertilization and light regimes so they'd actually control the photoperiod with these blackout blinds that pull over the whole thing. All kinds of neat things were developed in that time period. Okay, same time period, we developed a whole bunch of site preparation tools that were very effective at regenerating forests. These site preparation tools work. There's no question that they make trees grow faster and get establishment better. So no question about it. There were lots of them. They improved a whole bunch of substrate conditions for the trees to grow, and wonderful success followed where this was done. It's expensive to do this, by the way. So hand planting by 1980 was clearly on the way up in terms of quality. By 2000, when I first came here, the original silviculture professor ahead of me, he told me, Vic, there's no point in planting because the natural regeneration surpasses everything that was planted, and it's all a waste of time. It's not true. But not in 2000. That's not true. These trees grow, and they grow well. They could grow better, of course, but they grow well. And very reliable, very reliable. One of the things that also happened during that same era was the understanding that if you're going to grow a plantation, you have to have vegetation control. You want that kind of a system to work. So there's a lot of vegetation, a lot of calamagrostis and other grasses. And so one of the strategies for doing this, site preparation can help, but herbicides have been widely sprayed to control this. Again, the herbicides, there's controversy about the herbicides, but nobody can question whether they work or not. They work very well at getting trees established after planting. So no issues there. So getting pretty darn good at growing these things, and the community should be darn proud of it because they're actually very good at controlling growing plantations of trees. Now, here's where I'm starting to stick my neck out. I'm getting into areas that I know less about. The community knows more about it than I do collectively, but I'm going to try to look at this. I always look at forest management as being the place where people make the big decisions. they're the head of forestry. It's always led to believe that silviculture is the heart of forestry. They're the doers. They're the ones that actually make things happen on the ground. Okay? In Alberta and in all of Western Canada, actually, there's been quite a new insertion of these components that act between those two groups that are really important. They are extremely important in the way the forest is being developed. And one of them is the Regeneration Standards. Oh, back up, sorry. The Regeneration Standards, and they are linked to growth and yield models. Regeneration Standards tell us what kind of forests we should be regenerating, and then the growth and yield models project that and feed into the forest management plans and the allowable cuts. Okay, that's the way I see the forest. Now, this regeneration standard is probably the most powerful tool that is controlling things in our province right now, I think. And it's linked to growth and yield, or to the growth and yield models. Okay? Really controls a lot of what we are doing. Okay, so let's look at that. Look at the documents. You've got some big documents that you have to force yourself to read. They're not easy to keep your attention going for 376 pages for the Reforestation Standards of Alberta. And notably, the Forest Management Planning Standards is a much smaller document. And I think that something's wrong here when we look at that relationship. I think there's something wrong. Any rate, the Reforestation Standards are pretty conservative, and they tell us that we should be producing 4 different kinds of broad cover groups of forests after cutting. And the cover groups are based upon what kind of forest was there prior to the cutting, and then we have to try to replicate the composition of that forest. Okay, so here are some of those very effective plantations that are being produced. As an example of them. We've got lots of these examples of forests that look like this in Alberta. Okay, that's one. The other one is we might be producing coniferous deciduous mixed forests. That's another broad cover group we should be targeting and producing. And retention of mature trees in the center here. In the center, they did this by spray application. There's aspen clumps with spruce plantation around it, and spray creates the mosaic. Okay, there's also a mixed deciduous conifer forest that's encouraged. This one's a little bit ragged, but that's the type of forest that would meet a mixed conifer standard, and is deciduous. The main point I want you to take away from this discussion is that we're generally producing some relatively straightforward and simple forests, and we'll ask that question that'll come back, I think, later in the presentation. So the forest reforestation standards produce some of these relatively simple forests, and let's look at them a little bit more. They're surprisingly focused almost exclusively on yield. That's, if you look at the stated purpose of the reforestation standards, that's where it all seems to go. But I think that implicitly there's other things that are involved in this. But yield is the major thing that's linked to it. There's a linkage of the juvenile stands with growth, and that's really important. So that growth is being fed into growth models. We used to have just simple yield tables. They were just decadal yield tables. Every 10 years, you'd say the forest is going to be this size, going to have that density and that kind of yield. And then about 10 years ago, we shifted over to a growth model called Gypsy. And that model grows the forest year by year if you choose to, if you're interested in that. And some of the limitations of the model is that the future is going to be the same as the past. And that should give you some pause to think about that, whether or not that's a good limitation that you should accept. Okay? So the future is going to be the same as the past. Now, here's another area that I think, from terms of the background of the presentation, you have to talk about sustained yield and annual allowable cut. And we have a 200-year history of being interested in maintaining sustained yield. It started in Central Europe and Germany and Austria. They became quite concerned about timber famines and not having enough trees. It's part of and so we adopted the result of their actions in Western Canada, particularly. It becomes part of our tradition. It's right in our DNA almost that we're gonna do sustained yield and worry about this, and it's probably a good thing. Forestry schools have trained us in this area, and we seem to like it, and Alberta, I think, has adopted a relatively conservative approach to sustained yield. Almost exclusively simple evenaged stands are the net result. So there's nothing wrong with having evenaged and simple stands where you really want them. And there are some places where that's an appropriate thing, but we may not want them everywhere. Okay? For those of you who don't know this, and some of you may not, and I'm doing it for their purpose, a fully regulated forest is kind of the holy grail, or what you should be trying to get to, where you've accepted sustained yield, and you've got if you ever get to this stage, you've got even classes of timber in different, even amounts of timber stands in each age class, and the age classes get older, they grow, they shift over. The oldest one is ready to cut, and the silviculturalist then gets into action and regenerates the forest at the young stand. That's the simplest form of sustained yield using evenaged kind of forestry. Here's an example of what a landscape will look like under sustained yield, and I think there's not many of them in Alberta. I'd say that this is as close as we got to one. It's south of Hinton. I always think that Des Crosley probably regenerated one of those stands or some of those stands on those hillsides, but sometime in the long past. But it's a checkerboard of stands of different age classes in the landscape. Okay. Okay. I tried to have a look at what goes on in other provinces. What goes on in other provinces. And one of the conclusions I came to is Western Canada is a pretty conservative sustained yield group. We have pretty well the same ideas going right across from British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, and probably way less flexible than what you see in Eastern Canada. There's more opportunities to do other things in Eastern Canada. Okay, so went through a bunch of questions, and I read all the Regeneration Standards or did searches of the documents, and replaced the pre-harvest condition. Yes. Exotic species. That's a question I'm going to ask in the future. Should we be considering exotic species? BC allows the possibility. Alberta and other provinces don't. Other provinces in Eastern Canada do, by the way. Regen types, the broad cover groups, a couple from British Columbia, and a few from Saskatchewan and Manitoba. Uniform full stocking. This is an important component that you have to, the target is to have regular distribution of trees. And this may be a problem. This may generate a problem for you in terms of risk for fire. This could be a fire risk for you in the future. And I've had some discussion already in the room, and some people don't agree with me, but I'm going to put it out anyway. And the other thing about this is uniform full stocking may be a risk. We have free to grow in 2 of the provinces, meaning that you have to remove overtopping hardwood trees, overtop of spruce. We have to have a certain height that is achieved in 3 of the provinces. We got a linkage to yield as an issue. There's an even-aged assumption, and whether or not we allow succession to occur, stand changes over time in any of the models. It doesn't seem to be the case in any of the systems. Okay, pretty simple kinds of forests in our regeneration standards. I think we're probably missing opportunities for doing other things that may be good for us in terms of a landscape. Okay? Trying to figure out why Western Canada might be different than Eastern Canada. And I came to a number of reasons. You could say that we got simpler forests here in the first place, but we also had this big influence that came from the Hungarian Revolution. Soviets moved in to Hungary in 1956. They displaced the whole forestry school, the Sopron Forestry School. It moved to UBC, set up shop there, produced about 140 foresters who were trained in German European silviculture. And 32% of them ended up with graduate degrees. They loaded themselves into, 100 of them came into Western Canada, and they became really important, I think, in establishing a lot of our policies. So this is probably something that probably has influenced us. Many in the room know some of these foresters, and they're dedicated and bright bunch. They did a whole bunch of things, and they influenced the way we think about forest. Okay, here's some questions. Here's one of my questions. Are we confident using simple stand structures and simple growth models as a good basis for establishing our stands? They're pretty important, these simple growth models. Is it the right primary step in forest management in times of risk? So the simple models particularly, you have to keep that in mind. Okay, the other thing I want to show you is, or talk about, is the issue of forest statistics. Where are we now? A couple of points I want to make about this. We've got, that's the amount of cutting that's going on. Alberta is close to 100,000 hectares cut last in 2016. Planted 65,000 hectares. Okay. Areas affected by insects. This is accumulated effects of the insects from mountain pine beetle. That's, if there's damage to the stand from mountain pine beetle. Huge areas that are being damaged by insects in some ways. Burned areas. Huge fire in BC in 17, another one in 18. Depends on the year. Alberta, for instance, had a 600,000 hectare fire in 16. That's not on this diagram. So fire and insects are a big deal. They're probably far bigger than the amount of cut that we have, and they're going to influence things in a big way. The second thing I want you to look at is this number here, 65,000 hectares of forest cut. And that number means that my back of the envelope calculations, at least $1,000 a hectare to regenerate those stands and tend them. Okay, so that's at least 65 million, probably closer to 100 million, that we're investing in silviculture each year. So, big deal. That's going to come back and talk about that in a while. So this fire, the issues of fire, we've got a fire. Western Canada has got a lot of issues with fire, and it's likely not going to go away. Huge fires occurred in British Columbia recently. We had a huge one in Alberta in 2016. That's not on this map. And stand replacing fires are a big deal. They can have huge impacts on our yield, on our forest yield. This little beast has and will have an enormous impact on our forest yield. Mountain pine beetle. It's pretty devastating, very rapid attack, devastating, and it's unprecedented in terms of the Western Canada. And we're going to have to deal with this thing probably into the future. It's never going to likely go away completely, even though we still occasionally have some cold winters like this one. Okay, here's another question. How important are fire, insects, and disease to future forest yield? And you got to do the comparison to what we're focusing on right now, which is refining the estimation of growth rates from regenerated stands. Which one's more important? I'll let you ponder that for a while. This is my way of looking at yield in relation to frequency of disturbance. I don't think anybody in the room would argue that the curve is going to go down with a forest that's going to have lots of disturbance. And I'd also argue that Alberta's probably already been down that curve, even before any of this new stuff has happened. We already were down that curve. We just probably didn't fully acknowledge it, that we were in a risky forest in terms of the situation we're in. Okay. So let's look at the effects of some of those big issues on annual allowable cut. In 1999 to 2014, based upon the Alberta records of fires, we had 145 fires that were greater than 2,500 hectares. And I figure 2,500 hectares is a good round number. You can throw that out to say, yeah, that's going to stimulate the planners to say, I got to recalculate manual allowable cut. So there might have been 145 chances of that occurring. It didn't always happen, but yeah, it's going to be in pause and rethink about what the heck we're doing in terms of the forest plans. The other thing is the mountain pine beetle. We're currently in a surge cut in Alberta, which means that we can pretty well throw away our timber supply models and plans because that's what we're doing. Toss them out the window. I have to recalculate them sometime in the future when the beetle is no longer there. Okay? Future threats. There's lots of them. And I've got colleagues who spend their time studying this, and they can give you all kinds of reasons why we should feel depressed about things in the future. And in terms of droughts, rates of fire, rates and sizes of fires, rate of insects and diseases, and throw in invasive species. That's another big unknown. We don't really know what's going to happen with that. So bottom line is things could get worse. I don't know if they will, but they could get worse. I'm pretty convinced they probably will get worse, but I don't know how bad. So here's the question. How can we reevaluate the fundamentals of our silviculture management systems? How do we do that? Okay? could do this, adaptive management. This is a good way to evaluate what you're doing. Everybody would say that's reasonable. I think define the problem, design a solution, implement, monitor, evaluate, and then redefine the problem if you need to. Okay, good idea. I'd say we're not doing that. There's just too many barriers in the way. We've got all kinds of barriers in the way that are just simply telling us deep down in our souls that why I can't do it because this is going to stop me. That's going to stop me from doing anything. That's going to stop me. Okay? That's where we're at in terms of changing anything. And so we're going to look at a bunch of these things. But here, future actions. We've got to produce a forest that has increased resistance to disturbance and resilience to disturbance, both of them. And so that means including resisting disturbance at the stand level and increasing tree diversity at the stand level. Those are some of the things I think are solutions. A lot of smart people in this room, they might have some other ideas, and they will generate other ideas. But that's what we've got to do. Okay, barriers to change. We've got a strict ideology of simple, fully stocked, even-age plantations as the goal, and grow it, cut it, plant it, grow it, and cut it again. And we need that sometimes to encourage and convince investors that that's what we actually need. And sometimes we need to convince the Auditor General. If that's the sole reason we're doing it, then I think we have to have a chat with the Auditor General and the investors and actually bring in the concept of risk into their thinking about the way the forest is actually going to be regenerated. Okay? Risk should be the trump. So right now I think our simple sustained yield, we're using it kind of as a shield, a barrier to stopping us from accepting criticism and really thinking about the risk the way we probably should be. Okay. Another barrier to change. We've got a standoff between the government and industry. I'd say that's, just the industry, or the government's got an idea, they put together policy, the policy is looked at by the industry then figures out a way to kind of circumvent it a little bit, and that gets the government irritated, and the government then creates another more complicated policy to counteract that, and hence we got 376 page regeneration standard documents. That's, I think, how we get there. This is not trivial. And I don't think this is going to go away easily. It's not trivial. This is not a trivial barrier. I don't think any of the three barriers I'm showing you, the first one on our genetic DNA that says we have to do sustained yield that way, that's not going to go away easily. This is not going to go away easily, and nor is this. This one has got all kinds of big investments that have been put into place that call for, that we made a decision some years back about having a conifer stand and a deciduous stand, have two different operators on the same piece of land trying to make decisions independently of each other. That's a mess. And it's a mess that not every location has got this problem. Sometimes they actually are working, but frequently that's what we've got. We've got a situation where they're in a fight. And how can you change any policies if you got that going on? That's not a trivial barrier. And each one of these companies has got huge investments in management systems that they think is that their investors approved. Okay? So this is not going to go away easy. Those are big problems. Now we got some opportunities. Let's look at some of the opportunities. I don't want to leave this thing going and present things as though there's nothing we can do about it. Okay? Find ways to develop model stands in a more ways to model stands so that you can actually get a stand that's being produced that's beyond our current models. Our current models sometimes, I've heard forest management planners say, can't do that because Regeneration Standards says that we have to do it this way, and the Gypsy model says this, and therefore that's the only thing we can do. Whoa, that just stops me in my tracks when I think about that. We have at least one more flexible model than that. It's called MGM. We should be looking at that, and we should be looking at other models. Some of the process models, particularly with some of the climate change and other things that we might be coming across in the future. We've got other models that could be used in our prediction of yield and prediction of forest management processes. We can do better. We have to invest some money into this to get something better. And other opportunities. Manage fuel structures within stands. This has been a profoundly successful regeneration of a conifer stand. Too profoundly successful. But we've got quite a number of them that actually look like this. Beautiful, even-aged, fully stocked, uniform distribution of spruce that I think is going to be flammable, highly flammable in the future, highly vulnerable. Why don't we put in some barriers to fuel-type barriers and fuel breaks? Build them right into our planning systems in our management. That's burnable. The other one is increased tree diversity. If you've got an insect attack and it's only attacking one species, you're going to lose the whole stand if you only got one species of tree. If you've got 4 species of trees, or 3 or 4 species of trees, you may only lose 3/4 of it, and the other trees will grow faster, and it probably won't make a heck of a lot of difference in the yield. It's also going to increase the diversity of the stand. So here's an example of New Brunswick. They're planting regularly at least 3 or 4 species of conifers and trying to encourage 3 or 4 species of conifers within the same stand. Okay? That's an example of what we could do. Genetics. New genetic material. Superior orchards, superior genetics, and that could be adaptable and resist insects and diseases, perhaps more drought tolerant. In this case, there's an exotic species. Perhaps we should be looking at, fire-resistant larch. There's some larch species that are actually in the literature. They're really quite promising that they would be more resistant to fire. And why aren't we thinking about some of this stuff? If we actually want yield, well, let's pick the best species we can that might get us there. The other thing is opportunities, land zoning. Increase the intensity of management on some parts of the landscape. One of the ways of reducing risk is to grow the stands faster. Expose the same investment in silviculture to a shorter time period. Make the trees grow faster. Okay, so you can do that through genetics. That would be one way. But it should be done on the best sites. Shouldn't be doing it everywhere. It's just too expensive to do it everywhere. But we should be figuring out which is the best site quality and put them there. Put those kinds of things there and speed it up. Here's an example of an exotic species in New Brunswick that has been enormously successful at speeding up the rotation of the forest. Norway spruce, about 30 years old at this time. These stands are 20 meters tall. Think about that for a while, you growth and yield types. This one's got about 11 cubic meters per hectare per year growing, and it's been commercially thinned. probably could harvest it already, but they're going to grow it longer, of course, to try to get more value out of the trees. That's a form of reducing risk. Okay, it's also got some benefits for biodiversity too, because they put their intensively managed locations, parts of the landscape, and then they got other places that are more extensively managed, and the biodiversity on the hilltops is on these stands is better off. Okay, another opportunity. Link variable retention with stand development and yield. As a silviculturalist, I'm always astonished, really, that in Alberta, we think that we are should be completely throwing away any kind of residual tree on the stand in terms of its future influence on the stand in terms of yield. I can't quite figure this out, how we got to that point, but that's where we're at, because we have a single species, even-age management system, or simple forest. This forest actually is, from my understanding, they're not getting value from leaving these residual spruce trees, and presumably quite a number of them are going to live. They're not getting any growth and yield value out of those trees in terms of their current modeling. Got to fix that. That shouldn't be the case. And because you're actually doing the right thing by biodiversity reasons, and you have to bring those into our models. Simple models can lead to simple, I would call that really bad locations. Okay? You can use variable retention actually to maybe hide forests and hide spruce in the landscape. Perhaps we can find locations in the landscape where they'd be less likely to burn. There might be some barriers of deciduous, less flammable material around it, and increase the probability or place where we can plant trees in those locations, put those in the landscape, and actually grow them really well, surprisingly well. Here's Derek Sitters standing in the E-Man site, 50% aspen retention, 6 years old, not too shabby. By 15, they're in that same location. They're doing very well. In fact, probably as well as many of our better plantations as in this E-Man site. So here's what kind of yields we were projecting from this E-Man location. And you can see that the black is the spruce yield by the gypsy rotation. This is the rotation age, and this is the aspen, the regenerated aspen. And with 50% overstory, you actually get the best spruce and pretty respectable yields, 3.5 cubic meters per hectare per year. It's not bad. That's actually pretty good for relative to other places in the province. Okay, another opportunity. Use succession. We're not doing that readily. There are a few companies and few locations where they're actually looking at succession as an opportunity. And the way it works is a typical mixed wood succession would be taking a stand, establishing or getting the young stand growing. There might be some spruce in the understory, growing it, and it goes through a number of self-thinning phases, and eventually it becomes pure spruce in the long run. Well, you can speed that up with the cutting of the aspen when it's mature. Don't let it go through the self-thinning phase of the mature trees, and you can get this kind of stand structure after the cut. The gypsy model, the MGM model, both predict significant yield benefits using that approach over single species, simple stands. Both of them show benefits. Okay. Another opportunity is think about the regeneration that we're putting into the area. We can rank the tree species in terms of their risk. One of the papers I just encountered is by Elizabeth Aubain, and Ted Hogg is actually an author on it. They rank species in terms of risk of drought. And maybe we should be looking at that pretty carefully. So selecting the tree species that we're going to be growing in an area and making sure that we can actually grow them through the next bad period. So lots of work could be done in this in terms of actually coming up with better solutions. Okay. What will happen to yield if we continue as we are now with minimal assessment of or mitigation of risk? Well, I put my yield curve back up, yield risk curve, and put us back on there. And I think if all of my doom and gloom colleagues are correct, we're going to be going down that curve. And I would hope that we could do things that would stop us or put us back to where the star was before. That's what I'm hoping by some of the changes that I'm talking about. And how to go about that is find ways of getting around some of those barriers. That's another opportunity. These are not easy barriers to get around. I'm not going to discount that. But we have to get around them. And we have to use the talent of the community fully to do that. And find ways to mitigate risk. Okay, here's an opportunity. Why don't we set up some think tanks? Think tank or something that's going to actually look at the whole process, get all the smart people that are around and know their discipline, and then put them together in a room or put them together and try to address some of these problems. Okay? Here's another question for you. Is the $65 million to $100 million per year in silviculture expenditures that we're doing right now producing the most sustainable wood supply? Could we do better? That's just for wood supply. Not talking about biodiversity, but there's all kinds of things come along with this. Biodiversity influences. Okay, one last slide. So here's the way I'm looking at this planning thing in terms of our timber supply, the way we are currently looking at it. Got the forest management planners. Got the silviculturalists. They're a bigger group. There are quite a number of them in those groups. Got a relatively small group of people here and a relatively small group of people here. We got to get the talent from those other groups fully engaged and not be limited by what's going on between them, by these things. That doesn't mean we want to get rid of them entirely. I don't know if we want to get rid of them entirely or not. I don't know. I don't have the full answer on this. But when you've got a whole bunch of people here and here that are blocked, that's not a good thing. So that's the way we should be doing it. That whole thing has to be looked at through the lens of risk. We have to look at the whole problem through the lens of risk. And if we don't do that, we're probably going to be in bigger and bigger trouble. That's my thinking. So I want to thank you all. Thanks for coming, and thanks for all colleagues and friends. And I like to think my intellectual opponents sometimes as being benefactors for me as well, because sometimes they kick me in the butt and make me do things that I wasn't really thinking about before, and don't like it, but let's be honest, sometimes it's good for you. All my funders over the years. So thanks very much.
All right. right, well, thank you, Vic, for a very thought-provoking presentation this afternoon. So we have microphones on either side. We'll open up the floor to questions. So have at 'em. Oh, I see one person. Everybody's pondering all your questions. Are you going to lead this think tank?
Well, if we don't, I think we need something to think about. Yeah, Marty.
Yes, Vic. Do you see that there's a possible role for prescribed fire in Alberta's silviculture?
I'd love to see prescribed fire in Alberta silviculture. I just don't have I've from my own personal experience, I don't have a lot of confidence it's going to be done. But I'd love to see it. It's got all kinds of benefits. But I don't, it's just not, there's just too many reasons not to like the match that day. And so I'd love to see it.
Question?
Hi, Vic. It was interesting when you showed the Norway spruce and black spruce. I've been there, I've seen it many times, know where it is. One thing you didn't talk about was ownership of the land and where this intensive stuff is being practiced, almost exclusively on private land, with the Norway spruce especially. Is there opportunity for that in Alberta? More private land. We also have a resource that's unmanaged in Alberta, which is the white zone forested land. Maybe there's opportunity there. So I just think it's important to point out that all that great stuff you're showing, and it is really good stuff, is private land, right?
In terms of that situation, but there's no reason we couldn't do more intensive things on public land as well. I don't think there's any reason. Is there any inherent reason why intensive management should be restricted from public lands? If you have the big picture, if the whole big picture is taken into account.
The one thing is, and I understand what you're saying, you're right, we should be able to. The pushback, though, is the sense that at any given time, you can lose it. So you could spend a lot of money, and then there's a park or something else, and your investment's gone. Whereas on private land, you don't lose it. The other one being is you have to fight hard to get recognized for what you're doing. No matter how good the numbers are, it's hard to get recognized of what's actually happening. So that's the barrier you talked about. But again, the reason for the not putting as much into it is the risk of that investment just disappearing because of a change in government.
That's not something that can be discounted completely. But we do have a fair number of places in Alberta where the companies, I don't know of any forest management agreement area that's been denied renewal. So it is the case, but you're right, specific pieces of land could be isolated out and saying, that's going to this thing instead.
You got me on a topic that's really really hot for me right now. So
Good.
Yeah, I just recently spent 5 years trying to renew an FMA agreement. We got it. 5 years. 5 years to renew an FMA agreement. That's unreal. And then the other part is that it's not the FMA agreement. Things are happening where an FMA agreement has lost it used to be a very strong piece of legislation, a tenure, a long-term contract. And now there's things that can happen without you even knowing they're happening where you lose access to your FMA because of government policy. And you're not even notified. That's the problem. There's a constant erosion of the land base, and your FMA agreement isn't doing anything about it. It used to, but it doesn't anymore.
I cannot argue against what you're saying. If that's the case, then I know that there's a huge number of things going on. However, if we expect to have timber, I still think we need to deal with risk, because this is not, I don't think it's going away. It's not going to go away.
Communities still depend.
The community depends on functional mills. If the mill's closed for various reasons other than because of timber is not being available anymore, that's not a good thing for communities. Government should understand that as well. But short-term things versus long-term.
We have another question?
Yeah, I fully understand that risks are actually to many people are by chance. How do you convince the industry and the government that the risk is very likely to happen? Because people tend to regard this risk as nothing if they haven't really experienced that risk. Right?
You have a good point. If you don't experience the burn, then you think life is good. That's a tough question. I think I would probably think that the analogy would be to look at the insurance industry and what they're doing in terms of risk and how it's actually feeding back into real costs. And I think that investors are likely going to start to feed back into this as well. So if they think that your place is not risk-proof, has extremely high probability of risk of loss, then they're not going to invest. So I think it behooves us to reduce that risk, the probability of a major event, kind of like insurance, what the insurance industry does.
Any additional questions? Ellen?
Here, I'll show it from here. Just in your experience, Vic, can you think of examples or factors that would help break down these barriers? Particularly, I'm thinking about the government and industry headbutting scenario. Can you think of a time where those kinds of barriers were overcome to create a change?
I think they have to, probably the only way they're going to be overcome is that if both of them are sufficiently scared, that they say, okay, we've got to do things differently. And I think it happens then. It has to be a real genuine fear. Then the risk, then they'll probably consider it. I'm going to get Margaret first.
Hi, thanks, Vic. It's Margaret Donnelly here, an ecologist with Alberta Pacific. I really enjoyed your talk. You brought a lot of points up that are very near and dear to me for a long time. After 37 years of being a proponent for ecosystem-based management, I see many of the reasons why we are not doing ecosystem-based management more fully. And of course, what you've pointed out, simple models, simple regen tools, simple policies are one of our barriers to more fully implementing ecosystem-based management. And I think one of the things that you haven't mentioned here, which makes things so very complex in this simple world we try to model and operate in, is the intersection of regulations and enforcement. And the need for these simple models and simple rules comes down often to needing a black and white answer for regulations and for enforcement. And so I don't know how we get by that. There needs to be opportunities for multiple outcomes, for managing for complexity, all these great things that our research has shown us. But the implementation and feasibility of doing this on a large scale is very, very challenging. So I think it's great what you've spoken about, and I think it's great that we talk about our community of practice and the fact that we all need to come together and work towards these solutions. Thanks.
Yeah, I have nothing more to add. I think I'm sure you're right. They're not. That's not simple. Tim?
I got an idea, Vic. Maybe we should go buy insurance on these intensively managed stands. Then when they burn, we'll take that money that we get paid out and go manage our risk and plant drugstore planting or the other things to manage our risk.
Can you repeat that comment?
I think you're being facetious, Tim. Tim made a very facetious comment about we should buy insurance on intensively managed stands and then use the money to invest in what we really want to do or something like that. Is that what you? That's.
Yeah. But I'm just thinking, Vic, in terms of where we're going with fire in the future. I'm just thinking that.
Do you mind going to a speaker so everyone can hear, please?
Yeah, we can't hear you.
Other people can't hear you. Thank you.
There we go. I'm just thinking in terms of where we're going, or where we're going with climate change and where we're going with fire into the future, and it just seems like, I myself when I was with Canfor, had lost a lot of my work due to fire. We'd spent a lot of money doing a lot of really good intensive silviculture in areas that have a fire return interval of 60 years or whatever. And sometimes I just wonder, I agree with what you're saying, and I think that we need to really re-examine where we're going to go, when, and somebody was asking the question, well, how do we know that, when we're in a risky situation? Well, I think all we really need to do is pay attention to the fires in the next 10 years or 15 years to tell us whether we're in that risk category or not. But anyways, I speak as someone that has been in the industry for a long time and has lost areas. It seems to me that taking that money and spreading it out, spreading your risk out, would be a better approach. So I guess I'm agreeing with you.
But do you have any suggestions how you would spread the risk out?
Sure. Working with, we were embedded in Daishawa's FMA, so we started to take back in the good old days, more of a mixed wood management approach, where we were actually swapping land back and forth between the two companies. So we gave Daishawa land that we harvested that had conifer on it, that was coming back to deciduous. And they gave us other land that wasn't coming back to deciduous so well. So we swapped a lot of the areas between those four cover groups that you talked about. The other thing we did was we started to experiment a lot with underplanting. So taking so many trees a year, and when we were with Daishawa, and underplanting certain stands, that sort of thing, so that every year we had underplanted X number of hectares. This isn't to say that we're going to stop doing the way we've been doing things in the past. All I'm saying is that in terms of what the forecasts are, really we really need to sit down and figure out what we're going to do to be able to circumvent that or reduce the risk, because we know it's coming, right? I mean, the fire people are telling us it's coming. So what are we going to do?
Yeah, I don't have the simple answers, and I think there may be. I think we got to take this thing and treat it as a complex problem, and deal with it with multiple ways of looking at the forest after, not just one or two. I think that's what I would conclude from my look at it so far. There's lots of smart people in this room. I know you got ideas too, and there's ways of doing things. I'm just hoping that the barriers and some of those problems that you've addressed and some of these other things just won't stop us from actually thinking in other ways.
Hi, Vic. You have been focused on timber production. And if we want to talk about diversified economy, non-timber product that come to my mind. I wonder with the solution for like a silviculture for non-timber product. I came from Vancouver Island. When I was there, almost 20 years ago, like a slab picking on the island is really important. That's generate a lot of revenues.
There could be some non-timber products that could be very valuable. I don't know what they are in our part of the world. Certainly viewscapes are very valuable, I know that. And sometimes wildlife activities are very valuable for non-timber products. Berry picking could be valuable. But I would think that timber has to be part of the game. I'm not going to say that we should just give up timber and go to all these other non-timber products and say that's where we want to go. Because I think timber should be part of the game. I think it should be part of the game for the reasons I started out with it's a darn good product. We should be looking at it as a green product. And don't ever forget it. It's green. And we should be darn happy about that.
And one would hope that at the end of the day that we're all in this for the betterment of the people of Alberta and having forests into the future. So to find those solutions.
Yeah.
Marty.
Hey, Vic, thank you. I have to say I agree with most of what you were saying, but some of the conclusions that we seem to be getting to in this discussion are things which I think have been going on for a very long time. Foresters beating their head against the wall, trying to figure out why don't we do this better. And if you look at any other industry, in fact, you don't have to look at a different industry. Whenever Don Haid comes and gives his Phil's presentation, I suspect we're going to hear a really different story. There are means of dealing with risk, really sophisticated means of dealing with risk. And any other industry that didn't have the same kind of framework that we have up here is doing it. It's rational things to do. You're talking about things which we should be doing, and I don't think anybody would debate the fact that we should be thinking about risk and so forth. But the framework that we have doesn't make it in people's interest to do that. And so we end up with your call for a bunch of smart people to start thinking about this. Well, we come up with ideas all the time, and we know how to deal with this stuff. It's not so, I won't say it's not difficult, but there are techniques that have been out there used in lots of different places to deal with these types of models with risk and lots more sophisticated modeling out there, but we don't use it. And we don't use it because of the framework that this gentleman was referring to, and because we have a system that doesn't make it in people's interest to use it. So until we get past that, I think we're going to be doing the same thing we've been doing for the last 20 years. And getting past that, though, is particularly difficult because it's not as easy as just saying, well, they do it on private land, why don't we make it private land? Because that's the piece that just got introduced here, right? I suspect that we're in a trend that's going to keep on going with respect to these lands aren't going to be that valuable for timber. They're going to be used for other stuff. And if you're using them for other stuff, do you really want to put private rights on them? Because the private markets aren't likely going to work very well with respect to that other stuff. So that's kind of the conundrum I think we're in. And I don't think, to me, the biggest thing we're going to be hitting our head against the walls for unless we figure it out is how to make the framework something where it's in somebody's interest to actually do this stuff. I think it would have happened a long time ago if the framework was right, but we still don't have that right. That's just an opinion, but.
So the tenure system, I guess.
Well, the tenure system and a lot of the policies and a lot of our basic thinking about forest management is at the heart of this. Yeah. Oh, I still think if we want to keep wood on our landscape and wood products as part of our future, then we have to look at this and figure out if there are some good economic models and good policy models that are already in place, then why aren't we looking at them more carefully?
Any further questions for Vic? Going. If not, I'd like you all to join with me in thanking Vic for a very enjoyable presentation, thought-provoking.
Thanks very much, and thanks for listening.
Great. Okay. Well, this now brings us to the end of the formal component of today's event. And for those of you who have been invited to stay for the sponsor reception, you're invited to remain at Lister, continue to view the posters, enjoy a drink, have something to eat, and our formal evening program will start back in here at 6 o'clock. And just finally, I'd like to mention that our fall Phil's speaker will be presenting on November 7th, 2019. And our speaker, as Marty had mentioned, is Don Haid. He's the Corporate Economist, Director of Industry Analysis at Weyerhaeuser. So please mark that in your calendar and enjoy the rest of your evening and safe travels. Thank you so much for attending today.